Okay, hello and welcome to Graphical User Interface using C#. In this video we will be laying out the form for a simple calculator created in C#. I will try to adhere to only the pertinent points that we need to create this particular calculator for the sake of the length of the video or possibly videos. However, I would like to say that there are many resources online regarding building GUIs using C# and Visual Studio, and there will be other numerous videos out there about laying out forms and using various tools. So please feel free to research and utilize any resources that you can find. If you have questions regarding this particular application or anything else in a class, please do not hesitate to ask your instructor. The first thing we're going to do is start a Windows form project. So go to File. You can also go down, scroll down, and there's an option on this page. I'm going to go to File, New, Project. I'm going to make sure that I have Visual C# selected, and I'm going to come down and I'm going to choose a Windows Form App.NET Framework. Yes, there are some other options, but today we're going to be working with Windows Form App. So I'm going to select that, and I need to give my project a name. I'm going to call it, for the sake of this video, Simple Calculator. Now, this option here about restarting Visual Studio with 100% scaling, I'm using 2017, even though I have 2019 installed. How we build is going to be the same. So I decided to use 2017 because of all the tools that I already have installed for this version of Visual Studio. I don't know if 2019 will give you this particular message or not. This has to do with resizing of forms when the user resizes it, and we won't get into that in this particular video. I have been restarting it and using it with 100% scaling, but I'm going to try right now to avoid that. I'm just going to close the message. Once you have a project, you can see that we have a form, this gray area here, I highlight it. This is our initial form. Visual Studio assumes that if we're creating a Windows form application, that we will want a form. If I want more than one form, I can add other forms later. Over here, we have a properties frame right here, and these are the properties of whatever is highlighted in the design frame. Right now, it's the form. Normally, you should rename any object that you place on the form immediately, or at least before you do any coding for it, because that name is what ties that object to any code in the project. Now, in this case, I only have the one form and would not necessarily need to change the name of it, but if I wanted to, I could, and I would come down here and find the name property. It's under the design section, if you have it sorted or organized by section, grouped, and I can change it, and I'll just change it to calc for short and sweet. And what I would like to change is what is being displayed on the bar here at the top of the form, and so I will come back up a little ways, and that text property is what is being displayed, and here I'm going to change it to be simple calculator. And we'll see that it shows up at the top of the form. Later we will resize the form, but first let's take a look at the controls we can place on the form. So to the left here, I have some windows that are expandable if I click on them, and I want the toolbox. I will click on that, and you'll see the toolbox appear. And these are all Windows form controls. Actually, this one up above is the Windows form. These are, well, that's all controls for the forms. These are common controls. But what we want is on the common controls list. And we're going to use the label control for our display, because we're not going to be entering text into the box. We're just going to display text based on the buttons that are clicked on our calculator. If we wanted to be able to allow the user to directly enter data into the text box, we would want text box control. So I'm going to click on the label, and then I'm going to come over to the form, and I'm going to draw the label out on the form. Now it tends to do like we did right here. It did right here where it shrinks up around the text. But we're going to change some properties to make that look the way we want it to look. I have several properties I'm going to change for the label control, and I'll try to do them in order as I scroll through, not least of which is going to be the name of the control. But border style in this case is one that I want to change. So I'm going to click on border style, then click the down arrow, and I'm going to choose fixed 3D. This is what I've decided to choose. You might want to use something different, but that's what I'm using today. Now the order that I'm showing you these properties are not the order in which I set them when I would have originally created the calculator, because I would have set the size of the label and then the font and so on. But because I'm going to try not to skip anything, I'm going to set the font while I'm here. I can click on the expand button here to the left of font, and I'm going to change it to 28 point. I don't believe I need to change anything else with font. If I do, we'll adjust that later. We're going to want a right to left alignment. And so I'm going to come down to the right to left property, and I'm going to change that to yes. And that is going to make our text, if I can see if I can get the window to expand. I'll have to adjust it through the properties. But it's going to make our text align to the right side of the label when it doesn't fill. The text, I'm going to want it to start out with 0, like you would see on most calculators. So I'm going to go ahead and put 0 in for the text. And when I hit enter, you can see that the label now shows 0. I believe the next property we're going to reach going down the list is going to be the name property. And this is one of the most important properties to change with any control that you're going to access via the code you write. Because once you change this, you don't want to try to change it. You will never get it to work correctly. If you change the name after you've coded it, it will sever the ties between the control and the code you write. And CSharp or anything that you write a graphical user interface for with Visual Studio is not designed for you to code the visual portion, the forms, by hand. It's all about laying it out with a designer, and so it's not going to be easy to correct that if you change it. So always change it first. And I like to use a 3-letter prefix on my names that tell me what the control is when I see it in code. And LBL there, that's LBL lowercase, stands for label, and so I have label display. When I see that in the code, I'll know that that's a label control, and that gives me an idea of what properties are available to me in the code, as well as when I see code acting on that object, I'll have a better idea of what that code is trying to do because I'll know what kind of object I'm working with. I believe the next property that I need to change is going to be the auto size. And this is one of those properties where if you were creating this form, you may realize that the label keeps changing size based on the text that's in it. And you've seen that when I've changed it from the default text to 0, that the label shrank to fit the size of the text. We don't want that to happen. So it's probably one of those properties that you think about after the fact when you see the effects of what's happening. But I've already built this solution for this calculator, and so I'm going to hit it in order, and that's the next one up. And so we're going to change that from true to false. And what that's going to do is it's going to remain whatever size I make it. Now the size that it just jumped back to, that is the size as I last drug it out with a mouse. I'm going to be making it a specific size and location with these properties right here, the location and size properties. I'm going to change those and make it a specific size. Now, a caveat to that is that because I've already built the calculator, I've already done the calculations, no pun intended, on where I want the controls to be and what size I want them to be so that everything lines up correctly. You would, to do that, you would probably do it the way I would do it, the way I did do it, and that is to lay your label out and then lay some buttons out underneath it and try to get that first row aligned so that your label above and your first row of buttons below are all lined up, and then you will calculate the length of the button plus the space in between and try to come to some agreement, and then maybe readjust your label length. There'd be some trial and error there to get things laid out the way you want them, or you could sit and say I want buttons to be this size, and I multiply, I've got this many buttons and I've got this much space, and I'll backtrack and I'll go make the label that long. However you want to do it's fine. In my case, I just happen to know what the sizes are going to be because I've built it before. And I mention that so that you don't think that I had some magic way that I knew how to size it. I do. It's because I did it before. So my location is 3437. Right now we have 9241. So I'm going to change that to 34 and then 37. And that's somewhat arbitrary. That's just where I laid it out on my previous calculator. And that gives me, what that's telling it is an XY coordinate for this top left corner. And so we are 34 by 37 from the top left of this form. Next we're going to do the size of it. Let me say one more thing about scaling. When I began this video, I believe you saw, if I remember correctly, we saw the message that said to restart Visual Studio for 100% scaling, and I did not do that for the sake of being able to show you the full process. If you were to do that, you would have a different set of numbers for the location and size. I think mine right now is set to 150% scaling, and so you may find that you need to modify the size or location of any of these controls. So don't believe that these numbers that I'm putting in are set in stone. If you would like to change them for any reason, preference, or if you'd like to change them for the sake of something is not working quite right on your screen, please feel free to do so. You may also need to change your font size if you change the size of the label, and the layout of your buttons can change. I chose what I think is a relatively standard layout for the buttons for this form. You might want to rearrange them. That's fine. It's not going to affect their functionality. Where they're located on the form does not affect what they do. So just keep that in mind. So for this scaling, my size is going to be 387.66. So I'm going to change this 350 to 387, and then I'm going to change the height from 49 to 66. And now you see that my font fits neatly into my label. And you may think, well, why is the label far to the left of the form? Well, we could shrink our form now a little bit, and I'm just going to eyeball it and make it roughly centered. You could, if you wanted to, you could change the size of the form using the properties, but it's not always necessary. The only reason I'm using properties for these other controls is because I do want them to align very neatly. There's also a grid tool to snap controls to, but I wanted to show you how to use the properties, and I'm just going to stick with the properties of those controls. So I believe that is everything we need right now for the label control. So I'm going to then go in here and go back to my toolbox. I'm going to find the button control. Originally, when graphical user interfaces came along, this was called a command button. I still refer to it as a command button in that I use the prefix CMD when I change the name. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to change the name of this particular control. I'm going to come back up here. I'm going to find, notice I've highlighted the button. That's why the properties, you can see right here, the properties listed are for button 1. And I believe I passed my name. I have some things expanded. I wasn't expecting it. There we go, design button 1. And this one is going to be my clear button. And so I'm going to change it to CMD capital C lowercase lr, command clear. Now let's change our location and size for this button. And I'm going to scroll down and let's start with the size. And the size for this one, as I have it, is 288 by 62. And then the location could, I could type that in, but I could also just grab it and manipulate it so it's aligned with the label above. And as you can see here, the little blue line appears and it kind of snaps into place. And I can estimate how much space I want between them. And I'm just going to go with roughly that. I could enter the location, but we have several buttons we're going to lay out. And so now that we have the label control in place, we can align everything to either the label to start with, and then later to the buttons above it. I do want to change the text that this button is displaying. So let's scroll back up and we'll find right here the text. We're going to change that property, and I'm going to change it to CLR for clear. You could type in the word clear. Matter of fact, we can do that since we have this nice big button. Just go ahead and make it the word clear. Next, I'm going to need some smaller buttons for the operations and for the number keys. So we're going to go back to our toolbox, and it's the same button control as before. I'm going to drag that over here, and I really don't need to worry about trying to draw it out. I could either drag it into place, or I can draw it, change the size property. And I'm going to change the size property. And the reason I am is because I already know what size I need to lay out more buttons below that are going to be evenly spaced, and I won't have to finagle the buttons to try to make them all align properly. So I'm going to go to the size property, and I'm going to change that size for this one to be 90 by 62. And I already am 62 because I had aligned the top and bottom with the clear button next to it. So if I move my focus away from it, we can see that they're the same height. But I notice that I'm not aligned with the label. So I can grab that and I can bring it over in alignment with the label. And now I'm aligned with the clear button to the left and the right side of the label above. And before I change the caption or the name, and I've emphasized that the name is very important. Before I do that, I'm going to do something a little differently this time, because I'm going to need several buttons that are the same size. I believe, if I remember my count, I'm going to need 13 more of these. But what I can do is I can highlight it, and I can copy, and I can I should be able to right click and copy, or you can use Control C. I'm going to do the rest of them with Control C and Control V for paste. I'm going to copy this button, and I'm going to paste it with Control V, and I'm going to drag that over and put it in place. And then I'm going to just do a Control C again and another Control V. Actually, I don't think I need to do the Control C again. Just paste. And I'm going to bring this in line, and I may need to adjust that in a minute. Paste again, bring this one in line. Yeah, so now you can see that that's a little bit out of line. So I'll just drag this over just a hair. I should be able to get those to align. If not, I can fix that with my spacing. I'll paste again and bring this one into alignment. Paste again, bring this one in below. Paste again, bring this one in. Paste again, bring that in. Paste again. And the reason I did this before I changed the name is on the off chance that we mess up and we don't rename a button, I won't end up with two buttons the same name, because each one of these is getting a default name. And so I need another row of these, and I am going to need to make my form height a little bit taller. And you can check the position of the buttons and do the math and make sure that the spacing between buttons is all the same. Notice I've got a little issue with the middle buttons there not lining up exactly where I want them to line up. And it should be that they'll all line up nice and evenly. And then I'm going to need to make my form a little bit taller. And I'm just going to pull this frame down and drag my form down a little bit for now. And I need one more button this size. And so I'm going to paste that button in, bring it in here. And I'll stop there for a moment. And let's take a look at the position of this row in particular. What I want is this gap right here. And the snap grid is not cooperating with me. It does not want to let me drop it in between. And so I'm going to, actually in my case, because I have an example, I'm going to look and see what position I have for that button. So looking at my notes, it appears that I have the left side of that button at 134. So let's change the location of that manually to be 134. The height should be fine. It's probably not the same as my example, but it's the same as the other buttons in the row. So now if I pull away from that, we can see that I've got a pretty even spacing there between these. It might be off just a little bit, and I'm not exactly sure why that is. It's probably due to the fact that I've got I did it originally in 100% scaling. You can play with it. It's also good enough for government work in this particular case. If it were, if this was going to be a production quality assignment, then yeah, I would work it out the smallest detail. But for now, we just want to get moving. Let's not get hung up on the minor details. But I am going to go ahead and change all of these to be 134. In fact, I think what I'm going to do is make it 133 and just see if that corrects that slight alignment error. That looks better to me. Why that's different from my example, I don't know. But I can just evenly space that out, and I can tell, and some people might not have even noticed that I could tell that. They may have looked at that and said, it's perfectly fine, what is he talking about? Well, now it's perfectly fine, and I can sleep better at night. That one can come up a little bit. I'll move that up. Okay, so now we should have everything laid out very evenly. And I'm going to have another button come in right here. We're going to come back to that. First thing we want to do is deal with each of these buttons, their names and their captions. So I'm going to click on Start at the top, and I'm going to change this one's name to CMD for command. Actually, I'm going to call it command add. And then I'm going to find the text, and I'm going to change the text to be the plus symbol. Now I'm going to also need to change the font, but I will come back to that. Actually, let me state while I'm thinking about it, that before you do the copy and paste, something like a font change, it would be good if you did that first. That way all the buttons that you copy and paste will have that same font size, and you won't have to go into each one of these buttons and make that change. Obviously, you have to go into each one to change the name of the button and the caption on the front of the button, but you wouldn't have to do that for the font. So I will come back to the font, and for the sake of time in this video, I'm going to change each one of these buttons, and I'll do that off camera, so to speak. Then I will tell you what the names are so that you'll know in relation to the code. So I will be right back. You'll never know I'm gone. Okay, I'm back. You never noticed I was gone. Now I have all of my buttons labeled and renamed. Each of the number buttons are labeled CMD, and then the number spelled out, such as the number 1 is CMD capital O-N-E. That way they're easy to identify in the code. This one, the plus, is, I think I showed you that was CMD add. This one is CMD capital S-U-B for sub. This one is CMD capital M-U-L for multiply. And this one is CMD capital D-I-V for divide. And I mentioned that we need to change the font, and this gives me an opportunity to show you another little neat trick, that we could have changed the font before we copied, But we can also highlight and make sure that you reach, I didn't mention it, but make sure you reach out beyond the control that you want to include and drag your mouse over and highlight all of the buttons at once. And then we can go to the font controls where I'm here and change them all at once. I'm going to make this 20 and I'm going to make them bold. So under bold, I'm going to change that false to true. And then I'm going to click out of it and you can see we have nice big buttons, clearly readable, easy to click. Now that last button, the reason I did not create it is because I'm going to copy this button. I'm going to do a Control C. I'm going to do a Control V. I'm going to paste it. And the reason I did that is because it's just the right size to fit in this slot. And then I'm going to immediately come over here and change its name first. Remember that name is the most important change. And actually, I just noticed that CSharp does give it a new name. It doesn't copy the name. Couldn't remember if it did or not, but it does not. I'm going to change this one to be command equal. And I'm going to come up to its caption and change it from clear to equal. Excuse me. So now we have our full complement of buttons. And now I want to show you how to access the code. I'm not going to give you all the code because the code is listed elsewhere. I want to show you how to access the event. Now for every control for a form, there are a series of events. Events are some action that occurs. So for a button, you can click it, you can left click it, right click it, mouse up, mouse down. There's a long list of events for most controls. Every control has what the design window considers the default event, the one that's most likely to be used above all others. The easiest way to access this is to just double click the control that you want to modify. So if I double click the clear button, it opens up the code window for the form. This is form 1, and we did change the name. I think it's because we didn't save. Maybe we didn't save that name when we changed the form name earlier. I believe I changed it. It's fine. We don't really need to change the form name. And so what it gives me, beyond a lot of here we have, well actually it does list it as calc, so I'm not sure why it's not listing it as form or as calc here. It might if we close it and open it. That could be an anomaly in the designer. Let's not worry about that for now. So it sets up our code window with our namespace and all, but it also, what I want to draw your attention to, is it gives us a event shell. So this is our command clear buttons click event. And notice how the button's name is an integral part of the click event, and that's how it ties this event to the button. And there's more to it. There's going to be it's going to be added elsewhere in the design, but we don't normally edit that other code. We do it through the designer. Do not change this. Let Visual Studio create this click event for you for each one of the controls. When you're going to be putting your click event code inside of the body of this click event method or function, or whatever you want to call it. It's an event. And then when you get ready to add the next event, go back to the form and double click that button and let Visual Studio create the event shell, as it is often termed. Let it create it, because it is less likely to mess up the spelling or the arguments for the method and so on. You could create it manually, but why bother? Let Visual Studio do that for you. Be concerned with changing the code inside of the click event. And you're going to have to set the code for the click event on each one of the buttons. I don't believe there's any event listed for our label, but you will be manipulating the label from the other events. There'll also be a method or function that you'll have to create for calculating as you go, and you'll see that in the code that's listed. So I'm not going to go any further with the code here other than to show you how to get to the events. So as far as the GUI designer, or what we would call a WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get. This is what we see is what we get here. If I play this, if I run it, we will get, when it gets around to it, our calculator form right here. And the button that has the blue around it, that's just the button that has focus. You could change that so that none of them keep focus, and you can just click on them. Right now they do nothing. If I click on them, it's going to be your code that you add to those events that's going to make each one of these buttons perform an action that's appropriate for what that button's meant to do based on the mouse clicks. So I hope this has been helpful. If you have any further questions or clarifications, please address it with your instructor. And have a good day. Enjoy coding. One more piece of advice: once you code the window for the assignment and you get the assignment working, please feel free to come back, maybe make a copy of your assignment so that you don't mess up the assignment that you need to submit, and play with it. Play with the properties. See what they do. Do some research on them. You don't always need all the properties, but it's good to have an idea of what's available to you and how they in the individual properties function, how they affect the controls, how they might affect each other. So please feel free to experiment. Thank you, and good luck with the term.